The air in the grand ballroom of the Metrian Center was a carefully crafted cocktail of ambition, vintage champagne, and the cloying scent of gardenias dying slowly in their crystal vases. It was an atmosphere designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind everyone of the price of admission. Dr. Aris Thorne felt it seep into the silk of her borrowed gown, a cold weight against her skin. She stood by a marble column, its chill a welcome anchor in the swirling tide of bodies and conversation. The flute of champagne in her hand was a prop, its bubbles dying as slowly as the flowers. On stage, bathed in a soft, ethereal blue light that made him look less like a man and more like a deity from a sci-fi epic, her husband Julian Croft held court. He didn't just give a speech, he wove a spell. His voice, a smooth, confident baritone honed by years of boardroom conquests, painted a future that was dazzling, seductive, and terrifyingly simple. "We stand on the precipice of a new dawn," he declared, his arms outstretched, the picture of a benevolent prophet. Ethelred Corp is not just offering a product with aura. We are offering a release. A world without the debilitating weight of trauma, a world unshackled from the chains of the past. A world where every mind, every single human consciousness, can be perfected. Aris physically recoiled at the word. Perfected. It landed like a shard of ice in her gut. Perfection was Julian's obsession: flawless suits, flawless presentations, a flawless wife. But her work, the 10 grueling years she had dedicated to the Phoenix Protocol, had never been about perfection. It was about restoration. It was a delicate, painstaking art of neurological healing. It was about giving a soldier the tools to defuse the IEDs buried in his memory, not to pave over the entire battlefield. It was a key, designed with 1,000 safeguards, and he was marketing it as a battering ram. Her gaze drifted from Julian's beatific smile to the front row. Chloe Sterling, Ethelred's chief legal counsel, was watching him, her sharp, fox-like face tilted in an expression of rapt adoration that was entirely too intimate for a corporate event. Her lipstick was the color of blood. Aris had seen that look before, in hushed corners of other parties, in glances held a fraction too long. She had chosen to believe it was just ambition. Now, she felt the naivety of that choice like a fresh wound. "He's a true visionary, your husband," a voice slurred beside her. It was Mr. Abernathy, a portly board member whose breath smelled of whiskey and self-satisfaction. He gestured toward the stage with his glass. "Taking all that theoretical stuff you do and turning it into gold. That Dr. Thorne is genius." The condescension was so deeply ingrained he probably didn't even hear it himself. She felt the familiar, hot sting of being relegated to a footnote in her own life story. "Julian has always been very driven," she replied, the smile on her face a carefully constructed mask she had worn for years. "It felt heavier tonight." She murmured an excuse and slipped away, needing a moment of quiet. Julian had left his phone on a small, secluded table near the emergency exit. As she passed, the screen lit up, a slash of white in the dim corner. A message preview from a name she now saw with chilling clarity. "Chloe S. He's eating it up. The Phoenix is ready to fly. Just need to make sure the original nest is empty. Drinks at my place to celebrate? He'll be late." The Phoenix. The name felt like a violation. It was her secret name for the protocol, whispered to Julian in the dead of night, born from her hope of creating rebirth from the ashes of pain. The original nest. The phrase circled in her mind, venomous and clear. It could only mean her. The grand ballroom suddenly tilted, the polite chatter dissolving into a nauseating roar. The crystal flute trembled in her hand, and a single drop of champagne fell onto her silk dress, leaving a small, dark stain. She set the glass down with meticulous care, as if a sudden movement would shatter her into a million pieces. Across the room, Julian was laughing, his hand on a journalist's shoulder, a king surveying his domain. But he wasn't a king. He was a thief, standing in a hall built with stones he had stolen from her, and she was the last, most valuable treasure he was about to lock away. The cage wasn't gilded. It was made of her own trust, and the door had just been slammed shut. The silent, 20-minute drive home in the back of their chauffeured Maybach was a study in tension. The city lights of San Francisco smeared past the tinted windows, a river of fractured color that mirrored the chaos in Aris's mind. Julian scrolled through his phone, the blue light illuminating his face, turning his handsome features into a cold, impassive mask. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd left the event. Their penthouse apartment, a stark expanse of white Italian marble, chrome, and glass, greeted them with its usual sterile silence. It was a space designed to be photographed, not lived in. A showroom for a life that Aris now realized was a complete fabrication. "You were quiet tonight," Julian finally said, his voice echoing in the cavernous living room. He shrugged off his custom-tailored jacket, tossing it carelessly onto a $1,000 chair as he headed for the built-in wet bar. "Feeling all right, darling?" The endearment was a weapon, meant to placate and dismiss. "I saw the message, Julian." Aris's voice was steady, unnervingly so. She didn't move from the center of the room, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "From Chloe. On your phone." He didn't flinch. He didn't even have the grace to look surprised. He simply paused, the crystal stopper of the whiskey decanter in his hand, and then continued pouring his drink. He turned, leaning back against the bar, one eyebrow raised in mild annoyance. "Aris, it's just business. You've always been so overly emotional about these things. It's a weakness in your field, I imagine." The gaslighting was so reflexive, so practiced, it almost took her breath away. "Making sure the original nest is empty. Is that just business? Is stealing my life's work, my soul, just business?" He took a slow, deliberate sip of his whiskey, his eyes as cold and hard as the ice in his glass. The charming mask of Julian Croft, CEO and visionary, dissolved, revealing the predator beneath. "Stealing? Oh, Aris. You can't steal something that was handed over with a kiss and a smile. You are a brilliant scientist, a pure, wonderful mind, but you have no ambition. You would have let the Phoenix Protocol languish in academic journals for 20 years. I'm giving it life. I'm giving it wings. It's not ready. The cascading feedback loops aren't stable. It's dangerous, Julian. It could shatter a person's psyche." "It's marketable," he shot back, slamming the glass down on the marble counter with a crack that made her jump. "And, more importantly, it's mine. Legally." He walked to his gleaming chrome briefcase, clicked it open, and pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. He tossed them onto the glass coffee table between them. The top page read, "Marital Dissolution Agreement. And so is this company. And this apartment. And every piece of art on these godforsaken white walls." He then retrieved a second, thinner document. "And this. This is the real masterpiece. The intellectual property agreement you signed 7 years ago, when you were so pathetically grateful that I agreed to fund your little passion project." He crouched down, tapping a clause with his finger. Aris felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered that day, the celebratory dinner, the champagne, the way he'd brushed it off as a formality to protect us. She'd been so in love, so blinded by his performance of support, she would have signed anything. "It assigns all intellectual property developed using my initial seed funding," he recited with cruel relish, directly and irrevocably to the parent company, Ethelred Corp. "That's you, Aris. All your work. It's mine." "You can't," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I already have," he said, his voice a venomous whisper as he straightened up, looming over her. "You will sign these divorce papers. You will accept the modest settlement I've arranged. And you will disappear. Because if you breathe a single, dissenting word, the non-compete clause right here on page 2 will allow me to see you into the Stone Age. You won't be able to get a job as a high school chemistry tutor, let alone a geneticist. You'll be a brilliant mind with nothing but debt and the ghost of a reputation." He looked down at her, a titan of casual cruelty. "You were always the brilliant one, Aris. But you were never the smart one. You have 1 hour to pack a bag. Miguel, the doorman, will be waiting to escort you out. Don't make a scene." She stared at the papers, the neat, black and white words that had just methodically vivisected her entire existence. Numbly, She walked past the cavernous walk-in closet filled with designer clothes he'd chosen for her, past the jewelry box glittering with gems she'd never wanted. She went to her small, private office, the only room in the penthouse that felt like hers, and packed a single, heavy box. Not clothes, not jewelry. Her original research notes. The worn, coffee-stained notebooks filled with her frantic, late-night scrawls, the failed equations and sudden breakthroughs that were the true, untainted soul of the Phoenix. It was all she had left. As she stepped out of the elevator, Miguel, the kind, elderly doorman who always saved the corner pieces of his granddaughter's birthday cake for her, wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Dr. Thorne," he mumbled, holding the door open to the cold, foggy night. She stepped out onto the street, clutching the box to her chest, a ghost evicted from her own life. Lena's apartment was a sanctuary of controlled chaos. It was the antithesis of the penthouse, a space that hugged you back. Bookshelves overflowed, a half-finished knitting project with impossibly bright yarn lay draped over an armchair, and the air smelled perpetually of strong coffee and old paper. It smelled like safety. For 2 days, Aris existed in a state of suspended animation on Lena's lumpy, comfortable sofa, wrapped in a heavy, hand-knitted afghan. She slept in fits and starts, waking from nightmares of falling, only to find herself in the deeper nightmare of her reality. She was a ship torpedoed in calm waters, now drifting in a silent, foggy sea of shock. On the 3rd morning, Lena's patience, a notoriously finite resource, ran out. She slammed a thick legal binder onto the cluttered coffee table with a thud that rattled the collection of mismatched mugs. "All right. The official mourning period is over. I've read the IP agreement, the divorce settlement, and I've spent 48 hours wanting to commit several felonies. Let's get to work." Lena, a patent lawyer whose fiery red hair was a perfect match for her courtroom temperament, pushed her black-rimmed glasses up her nose and began to pace. "He's got you in a legal vice grip, Aris. It's a beautifully constructed piece of evil. The IP assignment is ironclad. The non-compete is a work of art. In a courtroom, he'd bleed you dry and you'd thank him for it. He has the resources, the lawyers, and a document with your trusting, beautiful signature on it." "So that's it?" Aris whispered, her voice raw. "He just wins? He takes everything and I just vanish?" "He wins if you play his game on his court," Lena said, stopping to fix Aris with an intense glare. "You can't fight him with lawyers. He owns the law. So, you have to fight him in the market. You have to prove that his shiny billion-dollar product is a lemon. A dangerous, brain-frying, lawsuit waiting to happen lemon. And you, my friend, cannot do that alone." Lena resumed her pacing, a caged tiger mapping out an attack. "Julian is a great white shark. He smells blood from a mile away and devours everything in his path. To beat a shark like that, you don't get a dolphin. You get a bigger, meaner, hungrier shark. You find someone who hates Julian Croft with the same pure, unadulterated passion that you are currently feeling." A name surfaced in Aris's mind, dredged up from the depths of her memory. A name Julian only ever spoke with a particular kind of venom, usually after a quarterly earnings report. Elias Vance. Lena stopped dead, a slow, wicked grin spreading across her face. It was the smile she got right before a cross-examination. The Prince of Darkness himself. The CEO of Viridian Dynamics. Julian's arch-nemesis. The only man in Silicon Valley with the ego, the bank account, and the sheer audacity to go to war with Ethelred. He's ruthless, he's a recluse, and the story goes, Julian poached his lead engineer and sank his first big public offering 5 years ago. Elias Vance doesn't just hold a grudge. He nurtures it. He waters it. He waits for it to bloom. A tiny, fragile ember of hope began to glow in the cold ashes of Aris's life. It was a terrifying, desperate, insane idea. Approaching Elias Vance was like walking into a lion's den and politely asking the lion if he'd consider a temporary vegetarian diet. But she was out of moves. She was a ghost, erased from her own story. To exist again, she had to become a weapon. "How do I even get in the same room with him?" Aris asked, the words tasting like a gamble. She sat up, pushing the Afghan away. The fog was beginning to lift. Lena was already on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Oh, you don't get a meeting. People wait months for a meeting with Vance. No. You show up. And you make damn sure you're holding the one thing in the world he can't buy, the key to his rival's destruction. The headquarters of Viridian Dynamics did not rise into the sky, it commanded it. A brutalist monolith of dark-tinted glass and gunmetal gray steel, it absorbed the weak afternoon light, projecting an aura of immense, unyielding power. It was a fortress, built not to inspire but to dominate. A shiver, unrelated to the brisk San Francisco wind, traced its way down Aris's spine. After 3 days of Lena pulling every string she had, calling in favors that Aris suspected would cost her dearly, she had been granted 10 minutes. Not a meeting. An audience. The lobby was a cavern of polished concrete and silence, the only sound the faint, rhythmic click of the receptionist's keyboard. Aris gave her name, and the woman looked up, her expression a blank wall of professional indifference. Mr. Vance will see you. 35th floor. The elevator will grant you access. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, opening directly into a reception area even more austere than the one below. A different assistant, this one with a severe haircut and an earpiece, led her through silent, efficient workspaces to a pair of imposing oak doors at the end of a long hallway. He knocked once, opened the door, and gestured for her to enter, closing it firmly behind her. Elias Vance's office was an extension of the building's philosophy. It was a vast, minimalist space that felt less like an office and more like a command center at the end of the world. The only furniture was a massive, uncluttered desk of what looked like a single piece of dark, polished wood, 2 severe leather chairs, and a low credenza. The entire back wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city and the bay, a king's view. Elias Vance himself was a man forged from the same elements as his surroundings. Dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark gray suit, he stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at his kingdom. He was taller than she'd expected, his silhouette sharp and imposing. He didn't turn when she entered. The silence stretched, a deliberate power play. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. Finally, he turned. His eyes were a startlingly pale, icy blue, and they seemed to miss nothing, assessing her, dissecting her, dismissing her all in one swift, cold glance. He did not smile. He did not gesture for her to sit. Dr. Thorne, he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that held a natural authority. My assistant tells me you have a matter of some urgency. My schedule is precise. You have my attention. For the next 9 minutes. I trust you will not waste it on pleasantries or melodrama. The arrogance was stunning, but it was a cold, clean arrogance, not like Julian's slimy charm. It was the arrogance of a man who had earned his power and had no time for fools. Pleading would get her thrown out. She had to speak his language, data, logic, and strategic advantage. She took a breath, rooting herself to the spot. Mr. Vance, I'm not here to discuss my husband or my marriage. I'm here to discuss a catastrophic design flaw in your chief competitor's flagship product, Aura. A flaw that I am uniquely qualified to explain because I designed the core architecture. That got a reaction. Not a gasp, not a startle, but a minute, almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes. He moved from the window and took his seat behind the vast desk, steepling his fingers. The king was now on his throne. A bold claim. Proceed. Ethelred is marketing Aura as a precision memory editing tool. It is not. It is a neurological sledgehammer wrapped in a beautiful user interface. My original research, the Phoenix Protocol, was designed for targeted neuroplasticity under controlled, therapeutic conditions, with dozens of ethical safeguards. Julian Croft has stripped out every single one of those safeguards to rush it to market for consumer use. She stepped forward, placing a sleek tablet on the edge of his desk. She didn't dare get closer. She swiped the screen, bringing up a complex, color-coded neural diagram she had spent all of last night recreating from memory. He has amplified the core function without understanding the feedback mechanism. He's created what I call a cascading neural feedback loop. The initial process of memory suppression is aggressive. It creates what is essentially a psychic scar. The system's AI, in its current state, then identifies that scar tissue as a new, distinct trauma and attempts to suppress it. The effect is exponential. In my early, contained trials, it led to disorientation and severe anxiety. But with the processing power and consumer-grade intensity he's deploying, it will lead to memory fragmentation, depersonalization, and, in susceptible subjects, catastrophic psychosis. He's not selling a cure, Mr. Vance. He's selling a high-tech, subscription-based lobotomy. Elias Vance leaned forward, his icy gaze fixed on the diagram. For a full, silent minute, the only sound in the room was the faint, whisper-quiet hum of the building's climate control. He wasn't looking at her story. He was analyzing her science, his mind working at a speed she could almost feel. "This is your unpublished work," he stated finally. It was not a question. "It was," she said, her voice steady. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning softly. His expression was a perfect, unreadable mask. "Let me be clear. You come to me, his estranged wife, on the eve of his greatest triumph, with an unsubstantiated, theoretical claim about a fatal flaw in his billion-dollar product. The world sees a scorned woman. Why should I see anything different? Revenge is a powerful, but often clumsy motivator." "Restitution," Aris corrected, her voice gaining a sharp, clear edge of its own. "He stole my work. I want it back. And I want to stop him before he irrevocably harms people. You, Mr. Vance, want to see Ethelred's market share crumble to dust. You want to see Julian Croft fail. Our interests, however temporary and for whatever different reasons, are perfectly aligned." He stared at her, the silence stretching into a battlefield of wills. The immense power in the room, all of it flowing from him, was a tangible pressure. But Aris met his gaze without flinching. She had already lost everything. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. "My team will attempt to verify your theory from the outside," he said at last, his tone final. "They will analyze all available data fragments from Aura's beta testing phase. If they find a signal that correlates with your model, we will talk again. Do not leave the city. Do not speak to anyone else. My assistant will show you out." He stood, a clear, unequivocal dismissal. The 10 minutes were up. As Aris walked out of that cold, silent office and back into the elevator, she felt a sliver of terrifying victory. He hadn't thrown her out. He hadn't laughed. He had listened. She had laid her desperate bargain at the devil's feet. Now she had to wait and pray he found her science compelling enough to go to war. The call came 2 days later, just as Aris's fragile hope had begun to curdle into despair. It was an encrypted number, a female voice as sterile as a surgical instrument. "Mr. Vance will see you. The archive. Midnight. Come alone." The line went dead. Lena, who had been hovering nearby, let out a low whistle. "The archive? That's not a meeting, Aris. That's a coronation or an execution." The archive was not a library. It was a private, members-only club in the reinforced sub-basements of a repurposed bank. A subterranean world where the city's real power brokers made deals in soundproofed rooms lined with rare books they never read. When Aris arrived, a silent attendant led her down a spiral staircase and through a heavy vault door into a private room. The air smelled of old leather, single malt scotch, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the high-end air purifiers. Elias was waiting, standing before a large, holographic display that shimmered in the dim light. It showed a three-dimensional model of a human brain, latticed with glowing, angry red pathways of corrupted data. It was her theory, made terrifyingly real. "My team reverse-engineered the data fragments from Aura's public beta testing phase," he said without preamble, his eyes fixed on the display. He was all business. "They created a predictive model based on your schematics. The cascading neural feedback loop. You were right." He turned to her, and the intensity in his gaze was like a physical force. "In fact, you were conservative. The potential for psychic fragmentation is significant. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. He believed her. But let's be perfectly clear, Dr. Thorne, he continued, his voice sharp as cut glass, leaving no room for sentiment. This is not a charity case. I am not a white knight. I am a businessman. I will provide the resources, the legal cover, and the technical support to expose Julian Croft for the fraud he is. In return, when this is over, the Phoenix Protocol, the real one, and its creator, belong to Viridian Dynamics. He began to circle her slowly, like a shark assessing its prize. You will lead a new, independent research division. You will have a budget that will make your old lab look like a high school science fair. You will have complete academic freedom. But you will have one guiding, non-negotiable principle: ethics first. We will do it the right way, the slow way, and we will own the most valuable patent in neuroscience for the next 50 years. It was a staggering offer. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, born from the ashes of a nightmare. Why? She asked, the word escaping her lips before she could stop it. She needed to understand his motivation. You have the data. You could just use this information to short his stock, ruin him from the shadows, and walk away. For the first time since she'd met him, a crack appeared in his armor of cool, detached professionalism. He stopped circling and walked to the bar, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. 5 years ago, I had a partner. We built this company from a garage. He was the visionary, I was the engineer. He sold our core algorithm to a competitor for a fraction of its worth and fabricated a data trail to frame me for it. I lost everything. I spent 2 years in legal hell, fighting my way back. I learned a valuable lesson. He turned to look at her then, and in the depths of his icy blue eyes, she saw a flicker of a long-dead fire, a reflection of her own pain. A shared, intimate understanding of betrayal. You don't just defeat men like Julian Croft, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. You dismantle them. You take them apart piece by piece, in the full light of day. You make an example of them so that no one else ever dares to try the same thing. He wasn't a savior. He was a fellow survivor, a man who had clawed his way back from his own abyss. He walked back to her and extended his hand. So, Dr. Thorne, do we have a deal? A pact to burn down a corrupt kingdom and build a better one in its place. This was no longer a devil's bargain. It was an alliance. A war pact forged in the fires of mutual animosity and a shared, chilling respect for the truth. She took his hand. His grip was firm, steady, and surprisingly warm. We have a deal, Mr. Vance. Elias, he corrected her, his grip tightening for a fraction of a second. A small, but significant, shift in the landscape. The war starts now. Welcome to the insurrection. The war room was a sterilized, windowless chamber buried 3 floors beneath the Viridian Dynamics building, a place that didn't officially exist on any schematic. It was a Faraday cage, shielded from all outside signals, accessible only by a dual biometric scan that required Elias's thumbprint and Aris's retinal pattern. In the span of a week, it had become the center of Aris's universe. The stark white walls were a chaotic collage of her elegant, handwritten equations, complex network architecture diagrams, and a terrifyingly shrinking timeline counting down the days and hours to the global launch of Aura. He's a ghost. A digital phantom, said Kale, Elias's head of cybersecurity. Kale was a man of few words and many piercings, who seemed to subsist entirely on energy drinks and a simmering rage against sloppy coding. He pointed a tattooed finger at a screen displaying a series of dead ends. The beta test data we analyzed? It's been scrubbed from their active servers. Wiped clean, then overwritten with junk data. There's nothing left to find. He's arrogant, but he's not stupid, Elias said from his position by the door, where he paced like a caged wolf, a cup of black coffee seemingly fused to his hand. He knows his only vulnerability is the data. We need irrefutable, time-stamped proof of data falsification. Something that can't be dismissed as corporate espionage or a rival's fabrication. Aris stared at the screen, at the elegant, flowing lines of code that represented Aura's operating system. Julian had twisted it, monetized it, corrupted its purpose, but the foundational structure, the very bones of the machine, were still hers. And she, its creator, knew its secrets. She knew where she had hidden the keys. There might be a way, she said slowly, her mind racing back through years of development. A failsafe. In the original protocol, before Julian's team got their hands on it, I built a hidden diagnostic backdoor. I called it the ghost routine. Kale and Elias both turned to look at her. It was for emergency data recovery in case of catastrophic system failure, she explained, walking to the main whiteboard and grabbing a marker. It creates a secondary, highly compressed, and deeply encrypted log of all core system operations. Every query, every error, every user input. It stores this log in a partitioned, isolated section of the hardware memory, completely independent of the main logs that are sent to the server. It's designed to be invisible. If he didn't do a full, line-by-line code audit and just layered his commercial crap on top of my core, he wouldn't have, Elias interrupted, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He's a marketer, a showman. He wouldn't have the patience or the expertise. He would have taken the functional parts and ignored the deep architecture he didn't understand. The problem, Kale grunted, already typing furiously, is activating it. According to her design specs here, he gestured to Aris's old notes which he digitized. It requires a unique, 256-bit encrypted command string sent from a whitelist IP address. Basically, you have to be inside the house to turn on the secret recorder. The plan they hatched over the next hour was audacious, unethical, and their only shot. Using corporate and social media surveillance, Elias's team identified the perfect weak link, a disgruntled, low-level network engineer at Ethelred named Ben, who had recently posted a series of angry, anonymous comments on a private tech forum about unpaid overtime and a tyrannical boss. The execution was a masterclass in social engineering. Lena, using a pseudonym and a fabricated profile for a hot new startup, contacted Ben under the guise of a headhunter, dangling the lure of a senior position and a 30% salary increase. She scheduled a preliminary video interview. As Lena, on a screen in the war room, charmed and distracted the unsuspecting Ben with questions about his career aspirations, Kale's team worked their dark magic. He's using a company VPN. Amateur, Kale muttered. I'm in his tunnel. Spoofing his IP. You're on the Ethelred internal network, Aris. Go. Aris's fingers flew across her keyboard, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was a profound violation, but it felt like a reclamation. She was a ghost, slipping back into the machine she had built. She typed the elegant, complex command string from memory. Execute_routine, ghost_log. Set_prim. Stealth_mode equals active, encryption equals max. Authorization_key, Phoenix. Aristotle. Thorne. 001. She hit enter. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, there was nothing but a blinking cursor. Her breath caught in her throat. He found it. He removed it. Then, a single line of simple, beautiful green text appeared on her screen. Ghost_log activated. Standing by. Data stream initialized. It wasn't the flood of data they needed yet, but a trickle. A tiny, encrypted heartbeat from deep inside the machine. It was proof. Proof that the ghost was real. Proof that Julian was hiding something. Wherein Aris breathed, a shaky, triumphant smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of physical contact. His hand was warm, grounding. It wasn't a congratulatory pat, it was the touch of a co-conspirator. Phase 1 is complete, he said, his voice a low, satisfied hum. Now we teach the ghost how to sing. The days that followed compressed into a sleepless, caffeine-fueled haze. The war room became their world, an ecosystem sealed off from time and sunlight. Empty takeout containers became architectural features next to stacks of server schematics. Aris and Elias fell into a rhythm, a state of intense, focused symbiosis. He spoke the language of strategy, leverage, and market forces. She spoke the language of neuroscience, code, and the soul of the machine they were fighting. Their minds seemed to fit together, two pieces of a complex, dangerous puzzle. One night, long after Kale's team had been dismissed, they were staring at a decrypted data visualization from the ghost log. It showed a series of jagged, crimson spikes, critical error reports, that directly corresponded with the exact moments Julian, in press releases, had claimed 99.9% user satisfaction. "He's not just hiding the failures," Aris murmured, her voice hoarse with fatigue. She traced one of the jagged lines on the massive touchscreen with her finger. "Look. The system generates an error flag, but a secondary script, one of Chloe's legal firewalls I bet, immediately reroutes it to a dummy partition, tags it as user anomaly, and schedules it for deletion within the hour. It's not just a lie, it's a systematic, automated deception machine." "It's wire fraud," Elias said, his voice a low growl of appreciation for the sheer audacity of it. "But it's still just data. A good lawyer, and Chloe Sterling is a very good lawyer, would argue it's misinterpreted, or a rival sabotage. It's our word against theirs. We need something more. Something human." A profound exhaustion settled over Aris, bone deep and heavy. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. There was a subject. In the very first, pre-funding human trial. We called him Subject Zero. The memory was painful, a path she hadn't walked in years. A Marine veteran with a severe case of combat-related PTSD. The protocol worked for him, on a surface level. It suppressed the target trauma. But the side effects. They were unpredictable. Memory bleed. Emotional flattening. I insisted we stop the trial. Julian was furious. He said I was being sentimental, letting one outlier derail the project. Elias had pulled up a chair, his usual intensity softened by the late hour and the glow of the screens. He listened without interrupting. "What happened to him?" "I don't know," she admitted, a fresh wave of guilt washing over her. Julian handled the debriefing. He made the subject sign a mountain of non-disclosure agreements and gave him a settlement that was generous enough to buy his silence, but not generous enough to be an admission of guilt. I never saw him again. The air between them grew thick with unspoken things. This wasn't just about market share for him, or simple revenge for her. It was about a fundamental line of right and wrong that had been contemptuously crossed. "You poured your life into this to help people like him," Elias said quietly. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. "I wanted to give them peace," Aris said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "A way to live with their ghosts, not to have them violently exorcised, leaving a void behind." Julian doesn't see people. He sees data points on a profit and loss statement. "Some people only see the world in terms of assets and liabilities," Elias said, and his gaze turned distant, lost for a moment in the shadows of his own past. "My former partner. He used to say sentiment was a bug in the human operating system. I've come to believe it's the only feature that truly matters." In that moment, the formidable CEO and the brilliant scientist vanished, leaving only two people in a quiet room who understood the profound, isolating wound of betrayal. He reached out, not to her shoulder in a gesture of command, but to her hand, which lay on the console. His thumb gently brushed over her knuckles. It was a simple, grounding touch that resonated deeper than any words, a silent acknowledgement. "I see you. I understand." The fragile moment was shattered by a blaring, klaxon-like alarm that erupted from Kale's main console, which had been left on a monitoring passive sweep. Red lights flashed across the room. "Intrusion detected. External ping on ghost_log partition. Counter-intrusion protocols active. System is fighting back." Elias was on his feet instantly, the commander snapping back into place. "They found us. They know we're in their house. Kale, on my comms now. Lock it down. Sever the connection, wipe our tracks." Julian's team was fighting back. The digital cat-and-mouse game had just turned into a brawl. The noose was tightening. And they were running out of time. Kale, with a grim look on his face, had been forced to permanently sever the connection and erase their presence, effectively blinding them. The war room, once a hub of covert activity, fell silent. The ticking clock on the main screen, now reading 72 hours until the Aura Global launch, seemed to mock them. "He knows," Elias stated, his voice a flat, hard thing in the quiet room. "He doesn't know who or how, but he knows his system was breached. He'll be tearing it apart, looking for the vulnerability. We've lost our digital advantage. We have to go analog." He turned to Aris, his eyes flinty with determination. "We need Subject Zero. We need him, and we need him now." Finding a man who had been deliberately erased was a nightmare. His name was a ghost in Ethelred's redacted files. It was Lena, with her particular genius for navigating the back alleys of the legal system and her network of disgruntled court clerks, who finally found him. She'd cross-referenced the dates of Aris's original trial with sealed settlement agreements filed in the county court. "Marcus Thorne," Lena announced over a secure line, her voice tight with triumph. "No relation to you, ironically. Former Marine, honorable discharge after 3 tours in Afghanistan. Last known address is a transient residential hotel in the industrial outskirts of Oakland. The place is a flop house, Aris. Be careful." Elias insisted on going with her. "This is not a social call," he'd said, overriding her protests. "If Julian's team is hunting for a breach, they might be hunting for loose ends, too. You're not going alone." The hotel was a grim, dilapidated brick building that smelled of damp concrete, stale beer, and quiet despair. The hallways were dimly lit, the threadbare carpet stained with the ghosts of 1,000 small tragedies. They found Marcus's room at the end of a long, flickering corridor. Aris knocked softly. The silence on the other side of the thin door was absolute. She knocked again, louder this time. "Marcus? It's Dr. Aris Thorne. From the study. I need to talk to you." The door creaked open a few inches, held by a tarnished brass chain. A pair of haunted, unfocused eyes peered out at them. The man was a shadow of the robust Marine she remembered. He was painfully thin, his skin had a grayish pallor, and his eyes, which once held a sharp, disciplined light, were now clouded and lost. "You," he rasped, his voice rough with disuse. Recognition flickered, followed immediately by a wave of raw fear. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "They made me sign. Said not to talk to anyone. Ever." "We know, Marcus," Aris said gently, keeping her voice low and calm. "I'm not with Ethelred anymore. I'm not with Julian. I'm here because I made a mistake. And I need to fix it." He let out a harsh, broken laugh that turned into a hacking cough. He undid the chain and let them into the small, bare room. A single bed, a rickety table, and a small television displaying a wall of white static were the only furniture. "Help," he wheezed, gesturing around the room. "Your machine was supposed to help. It worked, I guess. It took the nightmares. The explosions, the screaming. It's gone." He paused, his gaze turning inward to a place of profound horror. "But it took everything else, too. My wife's face when she told me she was pregnant. The smell of my daughter's hair after her bath. The feeling of sun on my skin at the beach. It's all static. Just noise. I have holes in my head where my life used to be." He was the living embodiment of her greatest fears. The walking, breathing, tragic result of the cascading neural feedback loop. "Julian knows it's defective, doesn't he?" Aris pressed, her heart aching for him. "That's why he paid you off. He knew it was dangerous." Marcus looked from Aris's compassionate face to Elias's stoic, unreadable one. His fear seemed to be warring with a deep, burning well of anger. "He called it a success. He told me my residual memory fragmentation was an acceptable loss for the greater good. He's going to sell it, isn't he? He's going to do this to other people. To the whole world," Elias said, his voice grim and final. "Unless you help us stop him." It took an hour. An hour of Aris patiently, gently explaining the science of what had been done to him, validating his experience not as a side effect, but as a predictable, catastrophic failure of the technology. It took an hour of Elias laying out, in clear, concise terms, a plan to protect him legally and financially for the rest of his life, to set up a trust that would ensure he and his family were cared for, regardless of the outcome. Finally, Marcus Thorne, the ghost from her past, nodded. A single weary but resolute gesture. He agreed to let their medical team perform a full, non-invasive neurological scan. And he agreed to give a videotaped deposition. Back at the Viridian War Room, the team worked with a frantic, desperate urgency. They now had all the pieces. They had the science that predicted the failure. They had the fragmented data from the ghost log that proved the deception. And now, they had the human cost, the undeniable, heartbreaking proof of the damage. They had their smoking gun, their silver bullet, and their ticking bomb, all in one. The launch event is in 36 hours, Elias announced, his voice ringing with command as he addressed the exhausted team. Their security, both physical and digital, will be at its absolute peak. We will have exactly one shot to get this information to the public. One window. And we cannot afford to miss. He looked across the room at Aris, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of the commander slipped. She saw the weight of it all in his eyes, the shared burden. This was no longer just corporate warfare. It was a crusade. And she was standing on the front line, ready for the final battle. The Ethelred Global launch was less a product release and more a coronation. Held in the city's largest convention hall, it was a spectacle of corporate hubris, a multi-million-dollar production of smoke, mirrors, and carefully managed applause. 1,000 journalists from around the globe sat in tiered rows, their cameras poised, ready to broadcast the gospel of Julian Croft to a waiting world. 2 blocks away, in a nondescript mobile command van packed with more computing power than a small country. The air inside the van was thick with tension and the smell of cooling electronics. Aris and her team watched it all unfold on a bank of high-definition monitors. Elias was not with them. He was inside the venue, dressed in a bespoke Italian suit, a wolf moving gracefully among the sheep, ready to create the chaos they needed. On stage, under a spotlight that made him look like a messiah, Julian was in his element. Today, we are not just launching a product, he boomed, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. We are launching a new era of mental wellness. We are offering freedom. Aura will set humanity free. Someone passed the sick bag, Kale muttered from his console, his fingers poised over his keyboard. Aris's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent van. Her hands, however, were cold and steady on her own keyboard. This was her arena now. She put on her headset. Elias, what's your status? Are you in position? Affirmative. His voice came back, a calm, steady anchor in the storm of her anxiety. Approaching the primary network hub in the press overflow room. I'm about to spill a very expensive, very hot latte on a very important server rack. Stand by for the fireworks. On the main stage, Julian raised a sleek, white aura device high above his head. And now, for the first time anywhere in the world, witness the power of aura. Live. That's the cue, Aris said, her voice sharp and clear. Kale, hit it. Now. A piercing fire alarm blared through the convention center. On the monitors, Aris saw the live feed cameras wobble as people started in their seats. She saw security personnel, their faces a mixture of confusion and urgency, rushing towards the server room where Elias had just created his diversion. In the ensuing chaos, Kale exploited the network vulnerability they'd discovered days ago, a tiny backdoor left open by a lazy contractor. I'm in their house, Kale grunted, a bead of sweat tracing a path through his eyebrow piercing. Firewall is down for system diagnostics. You have a 30-second window, Aris. The stage is yours. Go. This was it. 10 years of her life, the love, the betrayal, the fight for her existence, it all came down to this moment. Her fingers flew across the keys, not with the frantic energy of a hacker, but with the focused, precise grace of a surgeon. She was not breaking into his system. She was taking back what was hers. She found the main presentation feed, and with a series of elegant commands she had designed years ago, she bypassed Julian's slick marketing video and patched in her own. Override_stream, source_van_01. Inject_payload, Phoenix_reckoning. MP4. Execute. On the massive, 40-foot screen behind Julian, the shimmering Ethelred logo flickered, distorted, and died. It was replaced by the stark, clinical, and horrifying 3D scan of Aris Thorne's brain. The angry, red cascades of neural misfirings pulsed across the screen like a living disease. Then, Marcus's face appeared, gaunt, haunted, his eyes staring directly into the camera. His voice, cracking with pain, filled the silent, cavernous hall. It took the nightmares, Marcus's recorded voice echoed, but it took everything else, too. I have holes in my head where my life used to be. A collective gasp, like the drawing of a single, massive breath, rippled through the audience. Julian froze mid-sentence, his perfect smile dissolving into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He stared at the giant screen displaying his failure, then at the teleprompter, which was no longer scrolling his triumphant speech. Instead, it was displaying a single, repeating sentence that Aris had just typed. They know you lied. They know you lied. They know you lied. Chaos erupted. Journalists leaped to their feet, shouting questions. Camera flashes strobed across the hall like lightning, capturing every nuance of Julian's public execution. His empire, his legacy, his carefully constructed world, it was all crumbling to dust in real time, on a global stage, broadcast live to millions. In the quiet of the van, Aris watched the beautiful, perfect, righteous destruction she had wrought. She felt a profound, cleansing calm settle over her. She had not just exposed a lie. She had reclaimed the truth. She typed one final, simple command into the system, a message for Julian and Julian alone, a ghost whispering goodbye to the man who had tried to erase her. //END_protocol. It was over. The Phoenix had not just risen from the ashes. It had set the world of its captor on fire. 6 months later, the world was a different place. Ethelred Corp was a carcass, picked clean by federal investigations, shareholder lawsuits, and a stock price that had ceased to exist. Julian Croft, stripped of his assets, his reputation, and his liberty, was awaiting trial in a federal prison, his bail denied. Chloe Sterling, ever the survivor, had turned state's evidence for a reduced sentence, her testimony the final nail in Julian's corporate coffin. But in the sunlit, glass-walled offices of the newly christened Vance Center for Ethical Neurotechnology, a different kind of world was being built. Dr. Aris Thorne, no longer a wife, an accessory, or a victim, but a founder and a visionary, led a team of the brightest minds in the field. They were meticulously refining the Phoenix Protocol, stripping it of its potential for harm and honing its capacity for healing. Their first official project, funded by an enormous grant from the Department of Veterans Affairs, was a clinical trial designed to treat soldiers with PTSD. The first name on the volunteer list was Aris Thorne, who was now undergoing a slow, careful, and deeply compassionate recovery process, with Aris herself overseeing his treatment. Aris stood on the private balcony of her new office, a space that overlooked the sweeping panorama of the San Francisco Bay. The wind coming off the water felt clean, fresh. She was no longer a ghost. She was a presence, a force, a woman who had been to hell, and had returned with the blueprints for a better world. The glass door slid open and Elias walked out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. In the months since their victory, the armor he wore had gradually fallen away, at least with her. In the war room, he had been a commander. Here, he was just Elias. He handed her a mug, their fingers brushing. The jolt of electricity that had once been the friction of conflict had softened into the warm, steady current of a deep and abiding connection. I was just on the phone with the board, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it in a business context. He leaned on the railing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. They've unanimously approved the charter for the foundation. He handed her a tablet. On the screen was a legal document, its letterhead crisp and official. The Phoenix Foundation, she read aloud. A nonprofit organization dedicated to funding, research, and advocacy for ethical standards in biotechnology. And on the line for chairperson of the board, Dr. Aris Thorne. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they were not tears of pain, or anger, or loss. They were tears of overwhelming, unexpected joy. Elias. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he said, his voice a low, gentle murmur. You did this, Aris. You built this. I just provided some of the scaffolding. She looked from the tablet to his face, at the man who had seen her at her absolute weakest, and had not tried to save her, but had given her the weapons to save herself. He had respected her mind, honored her fight, and in doing so, had helped her reclaim her own soul. He gently set his mug down and turned to face her, taking the tablet from her hands and setting it aside. He took her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. I have spent the last 5 years building walls around myself, he said, his pale blue eyes searching hers, open and vulnerable in a way she never thought possible. And in the last 6 months, you have systematically dismantled every single one of them. I think, Dr. Thorne, that I am falling profoundly and irrevocably in love with you. I think, she replied, her own smile breaking through her tears, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes, that the feeling is profoundly and irrevocably mutual, Mr. Vance. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of victory or possession, not the claiming of a prize. It was a kiss of partnership, of equals. It was quiet and deep, and held the unshakable promise of a future they would build together on their own terms. She had lost a husband, a home, and an identity she never truly wanted. But she had won a war, reclaimed her name, and found a love built not on a foundation of lies, but on the unshakable bedrock of mutual respect and shared fire. She had created her own protocol, not for erasing the past, but for building a better, more brilliant future. And it was just the beginning.